So, did you do the reading? It was long but easy. How was Provence changing? What sorts of changes did we see in Provence as indicated by this article? What ways in which what were we seeing happen there? You don't need direct quotes. Just talk to me. How was Provence changing during the late 19th century? Rebecca? Yeah, okay. Right, industry, right? All sorts of industry. The trains is one aspect. There are other aspects where it's becoming increasingly industrialized, right? So trains are part of it. What else is another symbol of the increasing industrialization of Provence? The amount of tourists. Tourists is another huge change. That's another category. But yeah, the trains do add to the tourists. But in addition to trains, we have the fishing villages are becoming sort of industrialized. You have large steamer ships next to little bitty fishing boats, kind of like what. And she even mentions that a lot of this old and new side by side sort of thing that you see, factories alongside older houses, little fishing boats next to big fishing boats. These things are seen in Monet's works as well. The stuff from Argenteuil, which had an old chateau immediately next to factory smokestacks, the beautiful river and the cute little sailboats with the big highway bridge going across it, or the railroad bridge going across it, or even Impression Sunrise, where you've got the little fishing boats going out surrounded by these big, massive ships and cranes of the industrial harbor, right? So industry is big. Industry is one way in which Provence is changing, and as Katie mentioned, another way is influx of industry, although not everywhere, right? Primarily in the town of L'Estaque, right, which is not here, but very close to where these little huts are located. And we'll look at some pictures, but there were quite a few in black and white in the reading, right? How does Cezanne feel about all this? Good, bad, indifferent? He liked it? He hated it? What did he like? Did he like it? Do you think this was a great thing? Take a chance. You can be wrong here. No, I'm not going to beat you up if you're wrong. He did not like it. And in fact, he's not alone in that. Many people did not like the changes that were coming to Provence. Remember that for Cezanne, he is a native, right? He's not a visitor. So this is the place where he grew up. And when he goes back in 1860s, right, or actually it's the 70s, but he says in the 60s as well. He sees it changing, and the changes have only kind of begun in the 60s, early 70s, and they're really taking firmer hold in the 80s and 90s. He simply doesn't like it. I brought in the portrait on the right, a ballsy portrait of Anthony Valabregue, because Valabregue was mentioned in the reading 2 or 3 times. Remember that I didn't know this until I read this article, right? With these articles, I'm reading them for the first time along with you all. What I did to bring these together was I sort of read the first 2 or 3 pages and kind of flipped through it to see if it was looking interesting or not. But most of these I hadn't read before, and so I find out all of a sudden something I could have used 2 days ago, which is that Anthony Valabregue was this great poet and childhood friend of Cezanne's and Zola. The 3 of them grew up together. They're roughly the same age. They're all in their mid-20s in the 60s. And as a poet and a writer, one of the things he took up on a number of different occasions was how Provence was changing for the worse. How old ways were being left behind, and using metaphors for this. Things that he saw, Valabregue, in Provence that were allegories or metaphors for tradition and how sometimes those things get destroyed as a sort of microcosm of the changes that are coming to Provence. So he talks about, for example, how he writes about how the old Provençal kitchens are a great symbol for the traditions of Provence. How an old country villa, or was it an inn, that gets torn down can be seen as a symbol for the bad changes that are coming toward Provence. So Provence is changing rather drastically during the time that Cézanne is there. Cézanne doesn't like it. His attitudes are shared by others, but we see it even in his own writings. Caden mentioned tourism. At one point, he said, what we call progress in the text, so what we call progress is nothing other than the invasion of bipeds. He couldn't even call them people, right? Just things with 2 feet. The invasion of bipeds is changing Provence, right? So he does not like this whatsoever. Now, what evidence in his pictures can we find of this attitude? This is a question we raised with Pissarro, right, where it was very difficult or not immediately obvious to find evidence in his pictures of his anarchist, socialist slant. But our author today, whose name is too long to try to throw out quickly, Stana Soglu Kalmeyer, she suggests that there are visual clues in his pictures, in fact, themes that he repeats again and again that show his attitude toward the changes that are coming to Provence. So how do we find it? How do we see that reflected in his pictures? What sort of choices does he make as a painter that show this negative attitude toward industry, toward increasing tourism, toward a morphing and changing Provence?
There was one picture on, I can't pronounce the name, but it's on the one eye.
Right. Do we see something? That's not a Cézanne picture, though, right? That's an illustration from a magazine, right? I know it's kind of hard to tell within this, but the capsule tells us that. That's an interesting thing to point to, because right in the middle, we see not only do we see him, if you look at that particular picture, I have a copy of it to show you. You see a factory, and you see a smokestack, dead center, right? Spewing icky soot. And you see a new industrial bridge feeding it, right? A railway coming straight across. Do we see anything like that in Cézanne's pictures? Not particularly, right? We have some pictures where we do see smokestacks in amid the older houses, but they're integrated, right? And then, as often as not, we get these pictures like this one from the National Gallery where we have these isolated huts that show absolutely no signs of progress or change. And are often, this one's not entirely shuttered in. You can see the blue shutters on the wall on the left are in fact open on the upper story. But we talked about this on Tuesday, they're so isolated. They're so lonely that even if you get up close to these buildings, we don't see people doing things. They don't have the signs of being in use. Right? They're like ghosts, in a way. You know? Zombies. I don't know what you want to say. Petrified remains of a past time. Very haunting. I mean, Athanasoglu gives us that picture of one that has a crack running through it, right? That looks really kind of creepy, right? And the fact that John Rewald, who is one of the sort of the leading scholars of Impressionism, without anything other than what it's looking at, calls that one house the abandoned house. There's nothing, Cezanne didn't call it that. It just looks abandoned. And a significant number of his sites look as if they've been utterly abandoned. So we could take this as being these huts, these primitive huts, the cabanon, right? C-A-B-A-N-O-N. We know what these are called. This is what we're looking at here. These little nestled huts in the hills are just out there for communal use. They were built a long time ago, like before, they were there when Cezanne was born. And they're just open for hunters to use if they get caught in the storm, right? There's a fireplace. There might be a few supplies that people leave behind, but it's sort of a communal hut. And you find things like this often in mountain climbers have things that are similar, where they'll leave a hut with some supplies in it. And if you got extra supplies, you leave them there as well. And the whole idea is that if you get caught in a blizzard, you got someplace to go and survive. And this too, the weather in Provence can be really vicious. There's a wind they call Mistral, named after that poet that you read about, that blows from the east. And when it blows, I got caught in one once. I was driving, thank goodness, but I had to pull over and stop and couldn't see a thing. Just a big dust storm that blew through the area. The weather can be really unbearable. And so these huts are there for communal use. And they become, on the one hand, a symbol of tradition, of a life that's in tune with the land, of a community that isn't spoiled by external invasion, right? You can only have a place like this when people care enough about the community to not just pilfer it, and burn it down, break the windows out. Who does that? People who use the place don't do that, right? It's like when you live on a property, don't let your dog crap on the lawn. It's the people who don't live on the property let their dogs crap on your lawn. You pick it up if it's yours. Is that a good analogy? This sort of came to mind because we've got a problem with that in my apartment building, right? They get mad at all the doggers, like, we pick up. We live here. It's not us. Right? Same thing. Huts like this are safe if the people who live upstairs. It's part of the community. But the people that engage with are the tourists. Or the people who come down once a year or maybe once ever and would see this thing and think that's cool, and then they'll kid with a BB gun or something. Not the 19th century, but you get the idea. Slingshot to destroy the thing. So the cabanon is, for Cezanne, a symbol of heritage and tradition of Provence. And at the same time is also put forth as a symbol of changing Provence because of what appears to be, as often as not, a lack of use. Fallen into abandonment. Right? I wanted to bring in Valbrook for two reasons. One is in the text, but two, I didn't talk enough about, well, maybe I did talk enough about, but I felt like there's something I didn't say about the ballsy manner, that brusque painting manner that Cezanne has in the 1860s, where he's painting with the palette knife primarily, or when he does paint with the brush, such as in the hand, it's still put on in an incredibly vigorous, almost vicious manner. And throughout Cezanne's career, what we're going to see is that he's really interested in how paint is put down on the canvas. We talked a lot about the compositional elements and tweaking forms so that they become this large-scale jigsaw puzzle where he's really concerned with the two-dimensional arrangement of things rather than describing something he saw with great accuracy. He's interested in the two-dimensional arrangement of form, right? But if you think about that as being what he's focused on, which is really the world inside the frame, the world inside the picture frame, then the way in which you make that two-dimensional arrangement of form, which is the brush, paint, and the canvas, is also an ongoing focus. How you apply the paint to make forms. And the brusque manner that he has when he's young is always, I think, an undercurrent in his later work as well. If you look at how he's handled these plants down, whoop, that's not the way that was supposed to go. No. Well, that's not working now. I'm not going to use the pen today. You can see down here in the gray that he's come back with the heel of the brush, trying to scratch through the thick wet paint in order to make those very few branches that appear sort of scrumbled there, right? Again, old and new, right? This is the sense of agedness of this scrubby area, right? So he's always really interested in that. And one of the things I read about Cezanne is that for him, this brusque manner is, in many ways, and I think this article brought it up as well, is sort of, it's rustic. And when he's in Paris in the 60s and early 70s, he's putting himself forth. Part of his self-presentation, his self-definition is rustic. He's Provençal, right? You know, hunters and horsemen. And there are cowboys down there. I mean, I kid you not, Provençal cowboys, right? They have a particular uniform they wear. It looks kind of like some of the fabrics that were in that article, right? They're horse rustlers, they're farmers, right? They're cattlemen. And they live on a very unforgiving landscape and are quite proud of that, right? So in Paris, he's sort of this rustic hillbilly, right? Not hillbilly in the American sense, but you get the idea, right? The rustic farmhand kind of guy. And we'll see that even 40 years later, last year of his life, as he's sort of winding down, his paint application starts to get really, really dense again. So it's really never gone away. And he re-embraces it at the very end of his life. But even here, there's something sort of vigorous, deliberate. Try to avoid the masculine terms. There is something kind of muscular about the way he's putting that paint down and the way he's working the canvas. That is a holdover from his ballsy area. I thought the maps might be nice, right? So you have an idea. So the Rio Valley near Lestat. Here's Lestat here. This is the Bay of Marseille. Right? So Marseille now is a monster city, right? Probably the second biggest city in Paris, or in France after Paris. But it's huge. Paris has 19 what they call arrondissements, 19 districts, right? I think Marseille has 16. Right? It's huge, right? And it's the biggest one on the Mediterranean. So this is Marseille, and then in Cezanne's time, it's more like that, right? So you can see how much it's spread, and it keeps up to the top here. I don't have to read it. Right? And then I thought it was showing up, but maybe it's not. Right? So we're going to look at Gardanne here as well, right? And there's at the top is Aix-en-Provence, which is where Cezanne's home. Right? So it gives you a sense of the layout of the area that we're talking about, right? And the Rio Valley near the top is right here. This is the Rio Valley, right? So in this particular picture, I bet he turned it back to the ocean. That's my guess, right? You'll never find this image because you can see that Marseille is just eating it, right? So you're not going to be able to go this far, right? What he complained about in the 80s, just not going for the next 130 years, right? But I think I have a detail coming up. This is where the Rio Valley is right there. And the 16th here, that's the 16th district of Marseille. It's not included in Marseille. Okay. But there is Lestat, the old fishing village. And then, let's see. Right? I looked at the area we're going to look at next in the next map, and we'll blow that up, right? So here is Lestat, and here is the Rio. Okay? If you can read maps or even aerial views, look at what's going on here and here. That's mining, strip mining. And that was going on in Cezanne's time. So in addition to the industry, there was the other industries, the local industries, was coal mining, stone mining, area, and the area here in Rio that he's in is an area that was in fact being changed. And so they weren't big as this, right? But they're there, and he never shows us that, ever, right? He doesn't show us. He shows us a quarry in Gibemus, right? We saw that before, that wonderful orange with multiple yellow, little sandy bars back there, right? We saw that before. But he doesn't focus on these larger, sort of uglier industrial quarries, right? He found that one was sort of man-manipulated part. It's only at the very top of it. And it's a much smaller and older quarry there. Right? So, by the way, also on this, St. Louis, or Son of Lee, St. Henry, right, is another site that we'll see in St. Augustine's that was actually there. But right next to it, ding, 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 and we're looking down towards the heart of Marseille, the port of Marseille here. And then as you can on the other side, that's where those mountains are that we see across the bay. Okay? So just a little bit of area here. And then some of the pictures, I'm going to show you 3 paintings from Philadelphia, even though that's not really local art, just because they've got them, right? This is in our text. This is the old fisherman's village at Lestat, which we're just looking at. So now we're looking down toward the bay. We see this highlight or outline of those boats down there. And then the tile roofs as we look down where, again, no people whatsoever, to this point, sort of enjoying the pre-touristed fishing village. To this day, people in Europe look for little unspoiled fishing villages to visit because there's something quite quaint about it all. I think this is also evidence that in the 60s, Cezanne still had a lot to learn. It's not as solid a painting, not as well structured a picture as his later work yet. In the 60s, he's somewhat difficult. But this is, shortly after Pissarro told him to, stop being ballsy and start doing primary colors, right? And this, I couldn't get the greens quite to come out right on this on Photoshop, but you get the basic idea. Another view of the fishing village of Saint-Henri from up the hill a bit, and now we're looking toward Marseille now. And the bit that juts out, I don't know if it's going to let me do this right, we'll try it one more time. Yeah, that's part of that thing that's coming out into the water there is actually part of the harbor of Marseille. And you can see that the mountains rise directly out of the ocean here. Right? But again, he's focusing primarily on a sort of harmonious encroachment of industry with these houses. And he mentions, we'll see this again and again, how he looks at these houses, down at them, and the red tile roofs, which is part of that mining that we were looking at. Right? He looks at those red tile roofs as being playing cards. And those are his own words. They're like playing cards, he said. And I think that's a fantastic analogy. Because if you look at the way he rearranges planes, roofs and walls in his pictures, they end up really feeling like they're shuffled cards, or I think FSM Lubu mentions that they are like a house of cards falling down in a way. And if you look even here, you see the bit through the center right in here, how that's not the way those houses look. He's picked them up as patches of colors, as rectangles that he's composed. And then down at the bottom, you'll see that, it's hard to say exactly what it is. It's a chimney, probably, right in the foreground, where he has tipped the top of the chimney up, so it's utterly wrong perspectively, right, and turned it into that circle in the foreground, and not in the way that we would be looking at it, which would be more laterally. He's doing it for the design sense, for the composition. Right? It's so good this way. Right? Again, I think this one probably was in your text as well, because it does show the darkest bits within the city are the old church steeple and the new factory chimney, sort of side by side. And that's a very similar thing to what Monet had done in that view of Argenteuil, where we saw the spire of the chateau immediately next to a brand new smokestack. Right? But it's not belching, it's not disgusting. It's there like the picture that Katie mentioned, but it's not destroying the environment in the same way at this point. changing environment. Looking the other way, right? Turning around and looking back. Now we're looking back toward the valley where this one was painted. So it sort of turned 90 degrees. And again, all three of these pictures are up in Philadelphia, if you ever get the chance. It's got a great 19th century collection. It's just fantastic. Not that we don't, but theirs is pretty darn good. And so, again, this is exactly what the bay looks like. And now there's a little lick of the stock there, the crown of the stock. And Santa Rita is over our left shoulder. And the Rio Valley is sort of in sort of this area here, right? This is a close-up of where we are. So, like I said, we can follow Cezanne around pretty easily through this region. This is high on my hit list of next places to go, right? But Estac eventually got overrun with tourists and became unpalatable to Cezanne. So he moves inland to this town called Gardanne. And not moved, right, because he's still sort of living in Aix mostly. But he turns his focus here. And I think here we can see very clearly that idea of the House of Cards. The way he mentions these red roofs as being playing cards, tarot cards, if you will. And so Gardanne for him is less populated, but also Théanet is not in Gardanne, but it's sort of a suburb of Gardanne. And I found what I love about Google Maps is I was trying to see what I could find here, you know. And you go to Google Earth and you can find pictures of streets and whatnot. And so I was floating around and seeing if I could find anything like this, and of course I couldn't at all because again this area is entirely industrialized, right? But for Cezanne, it's again a sort of a traditional kind of village. I had mentioned in class on Tuesday that with the buildings in the foreground, these guys right down in here, it's kind of hard to figure out how they articulate with each other. There's a street involved there. There's that house right in the middle of what is circled there, and the little half house next to it. But is there a street between them and the one behind it? And if there is a street in there, you know, what happens as we move back into it? And we get to that next roof that seems to sort of cover that street, if there is one there. It doesn't make sense. But that's kind of the point, is that it's not supposed to be representational. What he's interested in is the play of angles and the play of colors and the play of forms. Right? So this is now near Gardanne. Again, I got Google Earth. Right? So there now there's a cooling tower for a nuclear power plant. Right? It's still incredibly industrialized, but the little red dot there, that's Théanet. That's where this is. And Gardanne is here, which is a much bigger town. So we're just outside of it, and now there's a super highway that runs here. Right? But again, we can look and there's, right, that's where they get the red roof tile material. Right? That's a mine. Right? That's a strip mine or open quarry. Right? So it's this. Yeah. Well, I know it from Google Earth, but yeah, the ground is a red clay color almost. Yeah. So yes, and this whole area, I think, my guess, that you can do one of those things where the Google car drove this highway. So I just spent some time kind of poking along the 57 to see if I can figure out where it is. I think that this is the harvest table. I think we're going to look over here. Right. So these are the mountains. You see that behind that there. So anyway, that's in your Gardanne, where we saw where Gardanne was relative to Marseille. We sort of moved a bit inland. And while I was there, I saw this city, guys. Wow, right? These things haven't changed at all, right? These kinds of houses are still around. It's one of the site photos from there. And this is the sorts of houses. This is not the exact site, obviously. But these are the sorts of things that Cezanne is painting. And when these things are during the off-season, if you will, to this day, you'd be amazed driving through the south of France. My wife and I went there twice in the off-season. We went there once over Christmas time, and once in like March on different years when we were living in Europe. And the number of houses that are just shuttered down in the off season is phenomenal. And people, when they leave for the day, just shutter down because it's much easier to maintain the interior more nicely without bugs as well. We don't do shutters as well here, but it's really a terrific. You just leave till noon, right? The way we all felt on Wednesday, we could just leave the shutters closed. And Cezanne captures that shuttered up look to these different buildings, right? They are incredibly shuttered, and never any real major sign of activity, of human activity in any of them. And again, that's interpreted as being a symbol of tradition that has been changed, right? Provence that has been impacted by this modernity. It's coming in two different forms, industry and tourism. And the other White House, which have both these up since the White House is moved. And again, another of these Cabanons in the hillside. I imagine that this is probably in the exact same vicinity that we've been talking about here, even though it's much more abstract and later in his career. We haven't looked at this one yet. The Chateau Noir. Very late picture. Remember that Cezanne died in 06. But around 1900, this is very close to the quarry that we looked at last week, or last class, but even the quarry. And so it's very, very close to where he painted many of his views of Mont Saint-Victoire. And in fact, this chateau was built in the 18th century, and I think its grounds were open to the public as a sort of regional park by Cezanne's time, which is, again, about 150 years after this was built, maybe 100 years after this was built. And the area around here became one of the areas from which he often painted Mont Saint-Victoire. Right, so we're just looking kind of the other direction, if you will. And it's not again, as a symbol of old and new, since that's what we're talking about. What is traditional about Provence? The reading talks quite a bit about old churches in the area, and you might think, well, here we are, there's an old chateau. Look at the Gothic windows, but in fact, it's not that old. It's neo-Gothic, right? So it's kind of both old and new. Right? It was built in the Gothic style, but in the 18th century, which is not the Gothic period. Still, what Cezanne depicts it as is a total ruin, almost, or utterly unused, as if it were as old as a Gothic church. And you can see that the windows, it almost looks as if it's roofless, doesn't it? That you can see through the windows rather than looking at reflections on the windows. He steers that question. But again, at this point in his career, he's making these incredible compositional choices, incredible paint application choices as well. And again, going back to what we saw at the very beginning, it's very brusque, isn't it? You know, it's unconsciously unpolished. Consciously, I said daring lesson, and maybe that's not it's like it's consciously wrong in some ways, you know? Unskilled or unrefined. The branches in the lower left corner, right? The branches that come off of that tree that shoots at the short at an angle. These ones right in here. Those branches there, right? There's something about them that is so heavy-handed, but at the same time, I think fantastic. You know, that brusqueness of Cezanne still poking through. I love how there's that branch in the upper right that is disembodied. It doesn't attach to anything. If you look at follow the branch to the right-hand edge of the composition, it stops. And the sky obliterates it for a second there. So it's almost as if it's this floating thing in the sky, like a bolt of lightning or something. Sorry? Yeah, exactly. But there is no human presence here, right? I mean, that's the thing, is that there are these things that are human presences, that there's these houses, but there's no people. He does paint people, but they're inside. They're isolated as figure studies, right? And then look at the other end of that branch. So as it comes down this direction, right? Look what happens above the top of the chateau. How the branch turns into that bolt of blue that seems to cut across the top and define the top of the chateau. It's just crazy painting choices, you know? And then up above are those branches that are coming down, or are they coming off of this broad horizontal branch, or are they coming down from a different one? And how does the tree on the left articulate, and what the heck is that? Right? What is that thing? You know? It comes out with all the force of like a falling log or something, but it just sort of stops above the chateau and is on this side of that tree. What is it? It's a compositional element. That's all it is. It's probably something he saw, a pattern in the rocks on the hill or in a tree in the background, and he decided that he needed that quasi-horizontal accent up there. It's those sorts of risks that many painters might say, well, that's, you shouldn't do that sort of thing. I think are exactly what makes Cézanne such a fantastic painter, right? The risks he takes and the violations of the basic rules that we have. But at the same time, there's almost no mistaking of Cézanne. These two pictures, you have a very similar sort of compositional structure. I mean, they would map on top of each other, but if you think about what makes it, there's a, again, I mentioned this, I think the first time we started looking at Cézanne, there's this empty area in the middle, and these sort of broader areas that bring your eye into it. So you've got this here, and then you've got these things that are saying, hey, look at me, you know, that are bringing your eye into it, yeah? And the same thing is sort of true here. You've got this area in here that's all dark and contrasting, and then you've got these other areas that are sort of here specifically to bring your eye to it, you know? And that's kind of how he pulls these things together. You know, he gives you these focal concentration points, and then sort of brings, and then he breaks them up, right? He'll come across the side of it and say, okay, now I'm going to slice that in half, right? Like that weird thing in the upper left corner. A nice detail of the paint mentions that even at the end of his life, he'd come back to this incredibly thick paint application, right? He's not doing it with the palette knife anymore like he was in the 60s, but the paint is so layered in the way that we read about with Monet, right? Remember how we read with Monet, he would put texture paint down and then cover it up? Well, if you look at what's going on with the tree branch to the right, in the upper right of this detail slide, you can see that there's some paint that was put down at one point that obviously had a stroke of something, right? This bit up in here. Obviously, there was something going on there that he decided to paint all over, so that the brush stroke lines that you see here and here, they don't necessarily line up with the color that you see in the surface. So part of it is that Cézanne is constantly altering and changing and painting. And then figuring out when to stop, which is for me the most amazing thing as well, right? How do you know when to stop? That was why I don't do art anymore. I kept working until this sometimes it's really good. But he kind of knows when to stop, and it makes it work for what I was talking before. When you get a line like that, that's obviously a line of paint that isn't there anymore, right? So he's still brusque, he's still rustic, he's still ballsy in a way, but not in what he calls his ballsy manner. And again, notice how much of the structure is deconstructed by the paint. The paint doesn't make forms, but rather it obliterates them. Colors are almost never exactly as they seem. Branches become the blue of the sky, for example. Gracie, you had asked about is the mine really that color? Well, here's the color of that stone, right? It is really this incredibly entrenched orangish red that you can find. One more detail, just because, right? Because at a certain point, his paintings are German expressionist pictures. You know, they are just about the dialogue of this patch of blue right there with the areas that are around it. The fir needles itself, which you see in sort of that area there, in these greens and browns and yellows to interact and commingle with the blues and the mauves. Even the branch of that tree is made up of no single color, and really every color you can find everywhere else in the composition. And it's just gutsy, bold, and really abstract picture making in 1900. Now, the other thing that our reading talked about were still lifes. Landscapes were a big part of it, but still lifes were a big part of it as well. And she mentions two things about the still life that also sort of fall into the same idea of extolling, right, honoring what is traditional about Provence. So what things in the still life do we find that are particularly Provençal? It's very similar to his other works. That's definitely true. The red of the table is the red of the Chateau Noir, right? And the blue of the background is very similar to the blue of the skies. And these are, in fact, kind of landscape paintings in their way, right? But that's not what she discusses. Well, think about what it is, right? We've got a ginger pot. Right? That's that piece of pottery in the background. We've got a pomegranate on a tray. Another one, or is that a pear? That's a pear next to it. But the big fruit on the tray is a pomegranate, and then a bunch of pears on the table. Okay. We also have this old rustic table. Not a fancy, refined one. Another one in the background. It's interesting how he stacked these two tables up. It's almost as if he's looked at this from multiple. What is the table in the back resting on, you know? With the books on it back there? When you really start to look at the picture, you start to realize how incredibly artificial the layout is. The still life allows the artist to do two things. Choose the objects and set them out, and then choose what he does with them as a paint. Right? And so he's also made a lot of choices here. So if we go back into our reading, what we find is that the fruit is indigenous, apples and pears. Pomegranates are also everywhere down there. Didn't mention that, but it's true. And this pottery, in particular, that this area that's rich in these mines of earthen mines, became famous for various kinds of rustic pottery. And when we came back from Provence, we weren't over here, we were over near Nice when we visited. And we came back with some Provençal pottery. They still sell it today at all the trinket shops, you know. And it's all painted with sort of broad, rustic patterns, and it's kind of heavy-handed. And the clay itself is deep, deep red, right? These days it's all decorated with olives and cicadas, this sort of symbols of Provence are painted on there, but in sort of rustic handwriting, if you will, right? The actual paint, nothing fancy, it's meant to look rustic. So here, Cezanne gives us local fruit and this ginger pot, a pot to put soaked ginger in. Ginger keeps if you put it in water, right? And then you can use the ginger water to cook with. It's really good, right? To season things with. So he's got the ginger pot back there. That is an example of rustic Provençal pottery. So what he's doing is he's arranging these things. One could argue, as she argues, that he's arranging these things as being sort of symbolic of the unchanging rustic nature of Provence. These are honoring Provence. And again, going back to the poetry that talked about the Provençal kitchen as one of the great symbols of the traditions of the area. Again, gutsy compositional choices. Look at the dish the pomegranate is sitting on, and try to articulate that. That's one dish, but it doesn't work, does it? The bit on the right-hand side of the pomegranate is too small to fit with the bit on the left-hand side of the pomegranate. Right? The edges won't match. Look at the front edge of the table on the right. Yeah? It's like a child's school desk with a drawer. You know, an old school desk with a drawer. But look at the front plane, this bit here, right? Focus on that for a second. And just try to put it together in your mind. Right? Look at the bottom edge of that front slat compared to the top edge of it. They're cattywampus, right? The line that outlines the drawer itself doesn't connect with anything. If you look at the corner, that tiny corner down there, you can see that he's not interested in that leg being a three-dimensional property because really, honestly, should you see this much of the side of the leg here? Compared to where if that's parallel to that, right? So not that way. You probably shouldn't see it at all. Right? You shouldn't see this side, but that doesn't matter. He needed this to make the composition work. And then as you trace along, you start to realize that the tabletop doesn't quite match up either. Right? It doesn't align with itself. And this is sort of true everywhere you look. He's taking all these incredible compositional choices. And it's all because, for him, the still life isn't about replicating what the fruit. Because what's the point, right? Who gives a rip about pears on the table? Right? It's not about representation. It's inspiration for his composition. And around that ginger pot, I've got a couple of details this week. Let me move closer. But there's these areas that are, what's going on? What is this? Right here. This is a pomegranate, right? What is it? It's like another one that he got rid of. All but just that sliver. See? Can you read that as something else? It's okay if you do, right? And then, what is that? Is that coming off of that? Is that part of is it another handle like this maybe? Notice how the pattern on this drape that's hanging behind it all of a sudden starts to look like solid elements. Like there's a cylinder coming up. Remember, everything is a tone and cylinder is hue, right? This table doesn't make any sense either. But that's okay, that's the point, right? This is why modern artists look back at these and say, this is where it all starts. Right? It's a long way from early Impressionism. And this is why we as art historians often usually, Cézanne was a founding member of the Impressionists, right? He's friends with Renoir, he's friends with Monet. They came to visit him when he's down there. He learns lessons from Pissarro. But when we talk about Cézanne, we usually talk about him as what's called a post-impressionist. And that's a term that we use for this group that really diverges from our standard definition of impressionism. Because our standard definition of impressionism are these guys that work outside with the idea of capturing a moment of light. Right? A momentary effect of sunlight, often on water. Now that's kind of a standard, and we've seen that never really fits anyway, right? Where does Caillebotte fit into that? Right? Is that really what Morisot is all about? Or Cassatt for that matter? Yeah. Or even really, is that really what Monet is all about, as we read, or is there more to it? But still, when we get past 1886, which is the end of the Impressionist run, in the mid-80s and 90s, we start to see artists that had been associated with the Impressionist group start to do really crazy stuff. Stuff that has nothing to do with what was going on before. And it wasn't until 1920s, I think it was, that an art critic, came up with this new term, post-impressionism, or even called neo-impressionism. So it's not like Cézanne called himself anything different. We just realized, as historians looking back, that Toulouse-Lautrec, Van Gogh, Cézanne, Gauguin, Seurat, these guys aren't doing the same thing. They're doing something drastically different. And each one of them is doing something so different from the others that it's no longer really a movement. And, of course, the question is whether or not it ever was. I don't have more details of this because I haven't had a chance to take good photos of it. But we've got quite a few of these around town, these wonderful still lives where he's upsetting the apple cart, so to speak, right? But also filled with rustic Provençal pottery, and where he's taking these incredible compositional choices or risks. And they're usually always in the same plane, such as the plane of the tabletop, the disruption of the unity of the plate, the places where paint and color supersede form. These are all things we saw him doing with landscapes as well. Walls would disappear. Houses wouldn't fit together. Lines didn't align, right? And this happens just as frequently when we look at his still life paintings. I wonder if this isn't the same table, right? It has the basic same structure. We see more of the handle. We've gotten rid of this bit of dish towel, although the reading mentions some of the fabrics that are down here as well. And now rearranging what appear to be peaches or oranges. Can't really tell for sure. So look at the structure of the table on the right-hand side. And you'll notice that it's anti-perspective, isn't it? The space between the edge of the table and the edge of the slat, the support slat underneath it, is narrower in the front and wider in the back, right? He's truly violating perspective. And by doing so, you become more aware of the two-dimensional patterns, right? Because your eye doesn't receive these things. And then look at the back of the table, the back edge of the table, and how it splays from the front edge. Look at the distance between here and here, right? And you can see that the back edge goes, right? The table just is not rectilinear by any means whatsoever. And it becomes a surface where he gets to work out these colors that appear elsewhere in the composition, the greens and the oranges, and some of the blues from the shadows all creep in at one place or another as they become fields for paint application. So that this area over here isn't about receiving the space at all. It's just a space to work out color codes, like color compositions. So I do have some good details on. And you can see that as we get around 1900 again, something we've seen is that his brusque manner is always lurking just beneath the surface. And again, he'll build up really good paint and then go over the top of it. Nice thin wash that picks up that texture, such as the green. So that it really ends up looking, I think this is really kind of a fascinating thing. Because he's built the paint up so thick on this milk jug, this octagon milk jug, right? And then come over the top of that with that thin wash of green. What he then ends up doing is replicating the way the actual jug looks, because the jug has the glaze and the clay that's built up thick and crusty, you know, and then you come over the top of it with a thin glaze that you can kind of see through, right? And it's over the surface of the texture of an earthenware jug, right? In this case, the thin glaze is over the texture of the paint that he's built up. Right? So it's almost like he's being an alchemist in a way, that he's turning paint into clay, or paint into pottery glaze. Right? But again, these sections in here where representation is just not even a part of it anymore. Right? It is just a place for the dialogue of the different tones throughout. Again, place doesn't make sense. The way this swoops off to the side here, and this one's coming this way, you know, they just don't really line up at all. He's broken everything apart. I always think of Cezanne as someone who's sort of, you know, if you had a photo that was on glass, he just smashed it and then put it back together in a way that didn't necessarily have to make sense. And then everything is a place for the color to work its way through. Again, it's about how to paint. It's not about how to represent. If that's a clear distinction to you. Okay. I love that glass in the back because he's, again, used it as the basis for something, but not the final product. Such that you get the sense that he wants to have the mouth of that glass wider, and now he's cropped into it from the side, so that on this side in particular, it doesn't make any sense. It really is just it's a glass. There's no doubt about that, but he's not at all interested in how it articulates together. At all. So it's really terrifically bold, right? And you can see how abstract artists would look at this and say, oh, let's just take that a step further. Right? And this is the sort of thing that we'll look at this probably on Tuesday very briefly. How this impacted people like Matisse, who actually owned Cézanne. Picasso, Matisse means had enough money to own Cézanne. But also Picasso, and I think in many ways the Germans as well. Even into the Russians, Kandinsky spent a lot of time in Paris, and I think that there's a lot there as well. More rustic Provence pottery, more rustic tabletops. I think this is the one that was in the background of the first one we saw, that had the more rococo sort of wavy bottom, which had the books on it before. But that's probably the same tarp that we've seen in other pictures. He uses some of the motifs. Sometimes he turns them into conical shapes, but sometimes he doesn't. Again, violating perspective, anti-perspective along the right-hand side, and then populating it with these local fruits, but also then Provençal pottery. And I've got some details of that, especially the pot that's nestled over here in that drapery, where you can begin to see the thickness of the paint. This is the year before he died, right? He dies in 1906. So this is really near the very, very end of his career. And this dialogue with paint that he's had throughout his entire career is really coming to a crescendo, to where it's just as dense as can possibly be. It's hard to imagine how much this canvas weighs as opposed to the bare canvas, because the paint is so very thick. Another nice detail, right, just because I can. Because I've got some nice photos of this. And I don't know, I love that in this case it's the exact opposite of what I just talked about. With the previous milk jug that we saw, it looked like he was using the paint to build up the texture of the jug and then laying the glaze over the top of that. Well, here the decorated parts are thinner, aren't they? He's actually able to reserve that space for it and then build up around it with these other tones, which, I think it was in a class when I talked about this. Maybe Gracie was, but this could be a symbolist picture. It could be a redone, where you could almost look at that and say, oh, that's like a abstract image of God or something like that. Or, the sky is opening up because there's something about it when you dive into the paint. You realize he's not applying it to describe. He's applying it because his central focus is on the canvas, not on the thing he's looking at. But he's more concerned with this play. And again, the way in which he's playing, not only with thick wet paint, but down below you can get a sense at the very bottom of that detail. But there's sections where he's actually playing with paint as it's drying. Look at how this bit down in here, right? You can see that as he's laid the paint down, some of it is already sort of skinned up before he's actually stretching it out across the canvas, right? It's the thing you can only do when you've been painting, every day on 5 canvases for 50 years, right? Which is kind of where he is in his career at this point. Again, another of these inexplicable porcelains, round on the front and flat on the back, right? Now, who knows? Maybe it was a wall stud. The sort of thing that a piece of pottery you put flowers in that you hung on the wall. But I'm not so sure that's really the case. I think what it is that Cézanne has decided, like he did with that glass that we looked at, he's decided that the round back is not what he wants. He really wanted that wavy front. Look at the left-hand side of that. It looks like the edge of a pie, right? And look what happens on the left-hand side. It makes that hairpin turn. The paint that he's applying for the edge makes that hairpin turn and then comes down and becomes one of the flutes, right? Really terrific little trick there that he's pulled on us. that suggests that it's just, you almost think of these drawing exercises when you're not supposed to look at the thing, but you're supposed to hand go based on what your eye is doing. Dry contour drawings, exactly, blind contour drawings. Yeah. Or even I remember hearing Sarah, our drawing prof, talk to Sarah, who's missing today, about drawing with her eyes closed. Just don't pick the pen up, right? The idea of making a drawing without ever picking up the pen. And that's, Cezanne's gone and done that right there, where he has that full of that blue and that pink peach color, and he drags it around. But he works it up after he's done it, right? Because you can't have done that in a single stroke. There's too many alterations of color. So it's so freaking deliberate, right? And again, just the monstrously thick application of paint, over which come other colors and under which we can see some colors. And how he decided that that's how he was going to get the effect and just leave it alone and then, come back into that little tiny touch of green right there against that pink to add to it. These are all elements of this fantastic command of the paint. Sorry? Yeah. Yeah, and from a distance, it looks like a single stroke, doesn't it? From this one, you really get that sense like this is a stage. But then you come back and you realize that it's so worked up, right? You've got that beautiful sky blue, light sky blue, that green, this is up pink color. From a distance, it kind of knows because you pick up where that blue is from a distance, right? It's just phenomenal. Right? We'll buy a spyglass. It's only $10 things around the other one. Go down to the National Gallery and just take your nose in these things. Right? It's just as good as it gets. And then how did he get this like that? Right? I mean, how is he getting these waterfalls? It looks like the inside of a cave. When you get that limestone buildup that comes from when the water runs down and then it has that look, and almost as if that's almost it's a natural thing that happens, right? And it's somehow collaged in this, but it's not, is it? It's built up in paint. I don't know how you get paint like that, in that rich area where it's not canvas. You have to. Mysteries of genius, right? I've got one more picture to look at, and it really is going to set the stage for what we talk about in the next class, which is Cezanne's impact on the 20th century. Again, from the National Gallery. This is not one of my photos, but one of theirs. But you can see, I think, again, we reiterate all the stuff we've been talking about. The goofy table that peeks out on the right, and you can see that overhanging resonance appears to be that exact same table, right? That sort of desk-like table, where the bit where the table peeks out, there's a detail on it, right? Not the best, this is not sharp. But becomes a place where you can play with the things we've been talking about. The side of the table down below, where again, he's really interested in getting the side of the leg, but only because he needs it as a step in the composition down there, right? And then the other leg, I assume, that barely peeks out in the lower left corner, is far too thick to be part of this same table, because it's a place where he's able to work just, if you think about that area, you've got these two little planes of color. You've got the blue and the yellow next to each other, right? And they're both painted really flatly, but that's an anchor point for him within the composition, right? But can you also see how these are composed in the same way as this landscape? You get the busy area and then the lines that sort of bring you into that busy area in the middle, right? And in this case, it's that interplay between the water jug, the water glass, and the peppermint schnapps, right? The bottle of peppermint schnapps, liquor bottle. as we get into this, it's just, wow, right? Talk about abstraction, right? We look at Picasso pictures where he shows us a coffee cup, and it just sort of breaks up into parts. We'll say Don was already there, doing that sort of thing. That coffee, that water glass looks as if he's been sort of messing around to where he finally decides I'm going to leave it there. But the reflection on the front edge of the glass, or maybe that's reflection on the back edge of the glass, you can't really tell, right? This bit here, the one that runs up the front edge of that, it looks like a reflection on the front of that glass, but then all of a sudden it obliterates the blue rim of the glass and turns into the back edge. But just, again, there's no front and back. There's no foreground, background. It's color against color against color. And then there's a place where it just melds into the reflection on the water bottle. The perspectives are all goofy, right? If you're looking at the glass at that level across the top of this water glass, then why does the top of the water bottle tip up higher? Right? And it's not that he doesn't know how to do it. He's consciously choosing to alter things in order to make the composition work better. Right? My last slide is the peppermint bottle itself, which does have a sort of swirling nature, but this could have come out of a cubist picture, which we'll look at on Tuesday, so I'm bringing it in today. But the way in which he fragments the things he's looking at, disassembles them, and then reassembles them. And that's what he's doing all the time. Painting for him is a construction, right? The actual painting is. But the things that lead up to the painting is a deconstruction. So he would look at something and he would take its constituent parts apart in his head, rip them into shreds, and then put them back together in a way that made more sense than what he started with. More aesthetic sense than what he started with. Right? It doesn't have to make rational sense. It has to make aesthetic sense. And that's really what art has always been about. It's just he's doing it in a much more radical and non-traditional way, which today may not seem all that radical, but in 1890s, 1880s, when he starts to do this, right, he is cutting away from everybody else. And this is part of the reason why his works often didn't get the kind of respect they get today, because the rest of the world needed some time to catch up with what Cézanne was doing. Okay. So there's our last slide for the day. We're done a few minutes early, which is so very rare for us. That means you get a chance to catch the shuttle. So if you don't have any readings for a while, so be cracking on your papers, right? Be making some serious headway on those, because the due date, right, time waits for no man, is a week from Friday. 2 weeks from today, is that right? Or is it next week? Today's the 11th. No, it's got to be next week, isn't it? It's next week Thursday. Because the week after that, we aren't here. The week after that's Thanksgiving. Right? Boy, the term be flying away, doesn't it? That's due next week. Next week's Thanksgiving. 2 weeks after that, and then finals. Right? So, yeah. Don't lollygag.